Friends, enemies, and the indifferent, welcome to one more episode of this particular podcast. On this evening, I am delighted to be joined by Mr. Brett Stevens, who is a journalist, a writer, I believe an author. I believe he's done some work with as a radio disc jockey, even amongst several other things, as well as being a fairly controversial character, as far as I can eke out. So you're very welcome to the podcast Night of the Black Sun, Mr. Stevens, Brett.
Thank you for having me on. It is an honor and a pleasure.
Likewise, sir. Likewise. The first time that I came across you really was, I think I mentioned it the other day, was in the anus.com review of an amoebic show that we did down in Austin, Texas, it was such an odd and hilariously funny review that it just stuck above head and shoulders above everything else. And I really like the fact that you were so on the ball with observations that other people were very afraid to make.
Thank you for reading. It was a fun review to write, and it was a great show, actually.
Yeah, for people, well, no, nobody would have seen that at all. But there was a little sign on the on the article itself. It said something like "Austin 10 miles, shit pants now," and it was to draw attention to some guy in the audience who'd apparently shat himself, and he was on his own, thrashing around in the middle of the gig with a clear circle of people all the way around him. It's like kind of typical of some of the upper echelons of the audience we were appealing to at that time, I think.
Very much a typical Austin show, too. That's how
Yeah,
it
well,
was.
I played there a couple of times. Was it your local hangout then there?
It was at that time.
Hmm.
It's not now. I've been all over Texas, but I was living in Austin at the time, I believe, and all the shows got taken over by, we called them crust fundies. They were crusties who were on
Mm.
trust funds and were kind of icky like that.
Yeah, yeah, Trustafarians, I think we refer to them over here as well, that kind of thing. But yeah, it was succinct, and being able to see that for what it was. And on our time over there as well, it was quite shocking going into to play in San Francisco and seeing all these guys sitting outside doing the whole "I'm completely homeless with a dog on a string," and then they pop out the iPhone from the back pocket and there's plenty of money in there and all that kind of stuff. But they're just kind of it was just that whole LARPing mentality, and I didn't get it.
No, it's weird, but it's what happens, I think, when a society becomes very oriented towards symbolic signaling and political signaling. And I think what they've done in a way is say, well, we're the ultimate egalitarians. We're, men of the people and all that good stuff. So it's not really that much different than what American politicians say when you think about it, but it's equally fake. And it definitely had a huge impact on the Austin scene because suddenly the scene was distorted by all of this money and attention that rewarded things sort of contrary to the original underground. And it really changed the experience of bands playing there, and it
Mm.
sabotaged a lot of local bands with promise. So it's definitely a very destructive trend.
Yeah. And how do you think that came about?
Well, what happened was the generation directly after the boomers started setting up trust funds because they were coming into money because the economy was really booming in the 90s. And they set up all their kids and then sent them off to nice liberal arts schools where they absorbed a lot of dogma. And then they realized that they could sort of have a very interesting social environment if they chose to take this path. It sort of became a trend. I think it's dying now. I think they've all gone on to, artisanal clogs and stuff like that they make. But it definitely was raging then. And Austin was just choked with these people who hadn't bathed in 6 months. And, Austin's warm.
Mm.
So that's quite an achievement, and
Yeah.
would just wander around. But they were never really short of money, if you know what I mean. They talked about being short of money, but they had money, and that
Yeah.
really skewed everything.
There's a kind of dilettantism about it. It's almost, I kind of detected this urgent need to be able to slip into a nice, cozy, warm suit of a ready-made scene, if you like. And people seem to make a lot of assumptions about that. And I was speaking particularly in regard to the British end of the scene. So you go to the States and you see how people interpreted it over there, and it was just a bit odd, really. It's as though they didn't get some of the nuanced parts of it, to be fair, you can't really expect people to. And I was having a chat with a guy that you and I both known the other day, and we were talking about this phenomena that people didn't understand how the whole punk metal thing in the UK was very much, it was kind of delineated around class as well. You know, where the punks would be very much, particularly down in the southern regions of the UK, it would be predominantly sort of middle class kids from okay-ish backgrounds, kind of stuff. And whereas up in the north, it would be the rougher sort of working class lads, you know, out in Newcastle, and even like Stoke-on-Trent, you had Discharge and all that kind of stuff too. So and people didn't seem to have got any of that along with it. They just thought, well, what we'll do is we'll take a few band names, put that onto a jacket, and that's it. Voila, you know, you've created a facsimile of something which was over here, you know.
Yeah, it's an instant identity.
Mm,
You have it's sort of like I imagine it was with disco in the 70s. You know, you get the clothes, you
yeah.
adopt the lingo, and suddenly you've got a position in society. And I think a lot of them were looking for a position that enabled them to be both outsiders and not really rock the boat, not really challenge the status quo. And here in the States, we have a weird, different relationship to class. If you haven't read Paul Fusel's book on that, it's very interesting fodder, at least for the basic issues. But a
Mm.
lot of these families had come from relatively impoverished backgrounds, but had managed to get wealthy over time. And then you have, what do you tell your kids about what they should be doing with their lives when they have all this money and they don't really know what to do with themselves? So they
Mm.
step into a ready-made identity and tread water for a decade or so, apparently.
Yeah, until they get through that phase, and then they're back into daddy's business kind of stuff, I guess.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So your own path as well, it kind of intrigues me. Because you mentioned that you were at the sort of you were kind of cancelled and shut down way back in the 90s before anybody was really, or before those kind of things seemed to occur to anybody to do to people. So can you go into that? You comfortable with talking about that at all?
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
It's basically public. It was a terrible time, and I'm always skeptical of. I try to avoid ever accidentally doxing anyone because you just never know when the political sort of inertia is going to turn on them. What
Mm.
happened to me was that I was early on a diversity skeptic. I never really wanted to join the people who were mean about it, but I didn't want to keep rubber stamping something that I saw as destructive to culture and in the long term destructive to all the people caught in its orbit. Again, I think it's just like a trend, and it's just people are using each other for the purposes of feeling good, having mental good feelings or having power or something like that. And no one's thinking about the consequences in the long term. And so I grew up in a city that is 75% non white. And so I was intimately familiar with diversity, and I know people from every walk of life, every background that I consider good people and good friends and that I care about deeply. But
Mm.
my observation was that over time, mixing all these different people in a place obliterated its culture, and that just allowed predatory commerce and its handmaiden government bureaucracy to
Mm.
come in and really just take over everything. And I saw this as very destructive. So I spoke up about this, and I had criticisms of a few other things that were probably edgy, like democracy itself. I've always been a little bit of an environmental fanatic, and so I was very concerned about things like container ships, cutting down forests, building too many suburbs, too many roads, too many people, that kind of thing. And all of this came together to make me basically a perfect bad guy. So someone who was in my social group, sort of on the periphery, decided to make a big deal of this, made some phone calls, and my life completely fell apart. Couldn't keep a job, was evicted from housing, lost a whole lot of friends,
Wow.
made was sort of had to live some hard times for a long time. I sort of had to live off the grid for a long time because basically anytime I popped my head up, there was all of this legacy in the search engines and with people talking about it that really
Wow.
damaged my prospects.
So it even affected trying to get a housing and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Housing wasn't hard by itself, but if someone did a Google search on the name or on the location I'd been from, they
Mm.
would often just opt not to rent to me because, they're like, oh, controversy, let's avoid this.
Wow. Fucking hell. Yeah, and I mean, of course, at the end of the day, you're proved right. But anybody that sticks their hand up preemptively on these sort of issues, it's like you're gonna pay a price, and then until the whole, as they say, the Overton window starts to change, which it definitely has, but perhaps only in the last 5, 10 years, and we're starting to
Yes.
see the real world results of keeping quiet and pretending that everything's okay, because that seems to be the way that most people have been dealing with this. It's like, don't rock the boat, don't say anything, don't do anything, never, it's dangerous to be able to raise your head above the parapet, but who the hell is going to do anything? So
Yeah.
looking at people like yourself, who it must have been a lonely kind of path to tread back then, where that was even before anything known as doxing or any other term like that. I mean, how did you deal with it, and what was the fallout of that in the long term?
The fallout of it in the long term was that I lost everything and had to rebuild everything. The plus side, the good side of it was that while I was hanging around being impoverished and lonely, I had lots of time to think, which was what I needed to make sure that I was doing the right thing. My hero, or at least his motto, is Davy Crockett, and his saying was, make sure you're right and then go ahead. So I did. I took the time to read the philosophy, to read the history, to think everything through, to make sure I was correct, and to invent the theories about it. And then I started writing again at the same time I rebuilt my life. And as you mentioned, over the years, it's sort of been more of like an arc. People have slowly been less concerned about this. I mean, in the very politically correct 1990s, it was just, fire and water. And now it's more like, well, everyone's a little rough and ready sometimes. You get a little bit more of a pass. But
Mm.
yeah, it was very alienating. You mentioned lonely, and I think I remember one time in particular, I was driving through Los Angeles, looking out over the lights of the city, and I had nothing, nobody. I think I had a car and some basic belongings, and no idea where I was going to go. And I was just thinking, no one else gets it. They will eventually, but they don't right now. And so, I take a lot of inspiration actually from you guys in the punk scene and in the hardcore scene, because you stood up and said what you believed, knowing that society was going to give you the middle finger in response, and that they were going to shut you out of places and not be nice and all that.
Mhm.
And it was kind of like the guys here, Thrash, the DRI, and other bands like that. They knew that they were going to be viewed as an antisocial element, and you just have to, tighten your loins and say, I am going to stand up for what I believe is right, for what I can logically say I think is
Mm.
correct. And if it's my funeral, so be it.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the thing about that, when I think about things like the punk and metal scene and stuff like that, it was great fun, and there were a lot of things that we were up to and doing and all that kind of stuff, and it was an experimental time as kids. But I don't think it was particularly effective. I don't think that I don't think that any message, if there was one, spread out with the small group of people inside these inner circles. I didn't see anything being embraced by people on a bigger scale, or maybe I was just missing it because I feel that with Amoebics and more latterly with Tau Crossings, I'm trying to articulate ideas which you're elaborating on here as well with this you're interested in environmentalism, basically, and the non-political side of environmental, just an environmental awareness, coupled with also like a racial and national awareness too. How we are part of the land that we are on, and how we feel intimately connected to that. And I don't feel that there was any great message that came out of the punk scene for me, apart from the fact that you can do what you want to do, and you've got free license to do that for a while.
I think it comes in waves. And at the time, I imagine there probably was a whole lot of confusion. But I think what happened was after the event, when other people were looking at it, I think you guys gave a lot of strength to people who wanted to be able to stand up and say, the situation I was in, to say, wow, everyone around me disagrees with me. I'm going to be completely alone in what I'm thinking here. But you know what? Right is right, real is real, and everyone's living out these fantasies, and I've got to get to the core of something instead. And I think that was, to my mind, the attitude that came out of punk and thrash and metal, sort of that crossover scene, was that you had to look at reality itself, and you then had to make decisions based on it, because there were going to be consequences other than social consequences. Almost all music, art, literature, that kind of thing is about social consequences. if I say this, who's going to like me? Who's going to throw me out?
Mm.
Will I get rich and famous and have sex with lots of big bosomed women? I mean, all these questions that concern people. But I think that, punk gave people the strength to say, well, I'm going to stand up and say, I don't think this is real. And I think something else is real. And so I think it took, it sounds terrible to say it, but I think it took 20 years for what you were doing to be in any way assimilated. I think at the time in the scene, based on what I saw in black metal, at the time the people are creating this, the artists are very much, they have their own vision. They're just trying to get it out. Everyone else is just trying to get a scene going. And then after a while it fizzles and everyone starts standing around going, well, what did it mean? I
Mm.
mean, black metal was effectively done by 1995, I guess, somewhere in there. And it was around 2005 that people were finally standing around going, well, what does this music actually mean? Why are we doing this? And I think it's those ripple effects, those second and third and fourth waves, that really influences sort of how people change their viewpoints. Now, also what you touched on is a brutal thing, which is that I think people often don't know how to interpret music or get a message from it or read the lyrics and understand them. So most of it, I think, happens second and third hand. There's a few people who notice some general themes and they communicate them. And I think it's, most of what's communicated probably would be a half paragraph of text, but that's really enough in a lot of cases. I mean, just to say, to have people standing up and saying, it's important that we be bonded to the land, that we have a culture that stands for the land, that we believe in nature and that we believe it's part of us, to have that kind of ancient feeling and that ancient connection come alive, that does a lot as far as snapping people out of the modern torpor. I mean, most people, I think, basically exist in a process of reacting to the world and trying to manipulate the world, the human world, and no one's really thinking about what's real. So, I mean, what you did, what you guys did, and others, you basically opened a back door. It's like Plato's cave. It has a back door, and you say, look, there's light out here.
Mm.
And this light is the idea that you can actually have an organic connection to the land, to your own life, to culture. There can be more of meaning than just this endless pursuit of jobs and products and having people like you. So I think it was very effective. But, as they like to say in this life, you have to be patient.
Yeah. How do you, I mean, where do you see us at the moment? Because I mean, the last few years have been so sort of indicative for me that that we are going through a great decline, and that it seems that there is the inevitability of that, but also there's a kind of responsibility as well from people who have already been aware of this as like a cyclical event as such as I think it probably is, about how we deal with that, because I can't imagine that we're going to be able to get any further mechanically, but that we're going to have to either return to a very basic form of existence using what we have to hand, or we're going to have to have a kind of evolution in consciousness itself to be able to change our minds. I mean, it's crazy because you've got this you return to the land movement over in the States, which obviously everybody's losing their shit about, because it's some white people that want to say, actually, demographics, we've decided to move away and we're just looking after ourselves and our own people until we can heal and get better. And it's like, this is what everybody says. So the Jews will say that if they have their own ethno communities, and the small black communities that have been starting up all over the place. But it's a bad thing when white people do that. But it seems such an inevitability at the moment that there's a balkanization is going to be occurring. And we're seeing the sort of very real tremors of that over in the UK at the moment, because the lines are being drawn. And even in the last, I don't know whether you follow the news cycle over here at all, but there's a phenomenon now. I mean, it's kind of it's very basic, but because it's basic, it's noble as well. And there's just people putting up flags all over the country, and it's like it's a basic instinct. It's dogs marking territory, basically saying this is where we are, this is who we are, and this is the one thing that they can no longer take away from us, because in this country it's like we're having the shit kicked out of us. And I look over at the States. Sorry, this is a bit of a long way around. I'm looking at the States and thinking, well, the Trump thing, you can say it could be argued that, well, you had no choice, because as I put it at the time, between the devil and the deep blue sea, really. But also, you've almost created a breathing space, although that's yeah, to be seen, really, in some respects. But over here, we've just gone worse and worse. So where are we going, Brett? Where are we going?
I think you're right that there's going to be a change in consciousness. First of all, I think that there's going to be an economic change. That's going to lead to political change. And from that, people are going to reassess what they really care about. What
Mm,
I'm seeing here in the States, and we're a little more mixed up and chaotic, I think, than it is over there. But what I'm seeing in the States is that a lot of people are saying, you know, I gave my life to a corporate job to live in a city to try to get along with this multicultural and this bureaucracy and this weird social scene. And now all I want is a house with a yard and a decent job that I don't totally hate, and the ability to basically live in a very pleasant place where there's a lot of nature around me. You know,
mm,
to me, it's always, I always look at the birds. When there's enough ravens around, when there's enough hawks, herons, egrets, stuff like that, then I start to relax, you know. But
yeah,
when they go away, yeah, we used to have them here plentifully, but when the concrete goes down, the birds go away. And you know, I've seen it many times. I mean, I think I emailed you that I've been in love with many forests, and in many cases, in almost all cases, at some point, you know, the construction crews came
yeah,
and things went away, and it's, you know, I remember as a kid looking at that, I'm like, you know, I think I was doing computer programming at the time for the first time, and I was into for and X loops. And I was like, well, if this is just repeated over and over again, at some point you run out of forest. You run out of space to keep doing this. And I think there's an awareness of that. Our governments have spent themselves into bankruptcy. They've moved people into these countries who could never have assimilated or integrated or whatever the fiction was. And now they're killing culture. It's killing people off. Um, it's destroying everything that ordinary people care about. And so I think there's a backlash. And what Return to the Land is people are just saying, you know what? We've created hell. Let's run away from it.
mm,
And I really appreciate that because I think it would be great if people did that en masse. You know, we could see suburbs in America as sort of the nascent beginnings of that. People like, yeah, I just don't want to live in the city anymore. I'd like to be around some more green stuff and people like me and that kind of thing. But now I think people are just saying, you know what, it's not that there's bad areas in the city. It's not that there's bad jobs. It's that the whole damn thing is evil, and we
mm,
have to get the hell away from it. And I'm not a big believer in good and evil, as you probably know. I'm a nihilist, but at the same time, there's things that are just bad. There's no
yeah,
way you can make them good, and I think we're seeing that about the society. And I believe that to your point, we're going to see a hybridization. That is, there's going to be the return to land movement mixing with the saner parts of conservatism and the saner parts of futurism, which is that I don't think anyone really wants to give up technology, but I think you're right. We're at a plateau. You know, I think as of yesterday, the AI fascination has sort of faded. People are like, okay, AIs are actually kind of dumb and they're not going to be able to
mm,
take over and be wise guardians for us. We're not there yet. So
mm,
I think people are looking at, you know, how do we keep the smart parts of technology without destroying our environment? How do we bring our societies back into balance politically and economically so that they're no longer these agents of destruction? And then what does it look like for me to have a fulfilling life if the goal is no longer to be a corporate person without culture who just makes money and, you know, spends it and has a BMW? And so I think you're right that there's going to be a massive sea change in how people perceive what is good. And those are the most fascinating historical times where people say, you know, what we thought was good isn't good. What I want now is this other thing.
mm.
And where we are right now as artists, as writers, I think is trying to define what that thing that they want is because
It's all,
nobody can really visualize it.
it's almost as though we have to instantiate first principles. We need to find out what they are again, because we've spent a lot of time roaming around and helping ourselves to this big bucket of sweeties of sensory experience all over the place without really keeping ourselves grounded and earthed in what we should have done terra firma. It's like not having that really healthy relationship with the spirit of nature itself. And I'm just wondering how many people think in these ways, and how it can constellate, how people can come together, because you see these tentative movements, the return to the land and stuff like that. Brilliant. We've got a kind of version apparently over here in Wales, which is popping up now, and of course they're having hysteria about it because they're all far right and blah blah blah, all this sort of shit, which obviously doesn't work anymore. All these pejoratives don't really, they don't have the sting that they used to. As you say, things do tend to change a little bit, and people go, ah, oh well, you know. So I wonder how many people are thinking along these lines, as in we need to we need to try and find a way to construct. Because when I think about it, I'm thinking about the who has value and what is value, you know. And I don't consider myself to be a valuable person until I can find a way to contribute. And I don't, also I don't see myself as a particularly sociable person. I don't know about you, but I'm not a big sort of community minded person. I don't want to go to fucking community meetings and talk to people about the, you know, the hedges down the road or whatever, any of that stuff. But I'd still like to help out if I could see that there were enough people that wanted to initiate some form of, it's not just a survival, but it's almost, I see it as almost like a human seed bank. It's like we need to be able to find some way of preserving what is best, what is noble and what is true in the culture that we've managed to achieve so far. Because I feel that without the connection, more books, you know, more transmission of knowledge and stuff like that, we don't have that because of AI. You know, we're a little bit stuck with that. So as I say, I kind of think perhaps we need to think about what can we do, what skills do we have, because they might be just needed on a very simple survival sense if the entire financial system collapses, which it could do. You know, who knows?
Yeah. Or at least become permanently moribund, at which point only
Mm.
a few people are going to make out like bandits and the rest are going to be kind of toast. You know, I think you hit on something with the fact that we're sort of veering back toward realism away from this world of symbolism. And we're trying to find some way to visualize a life where we can do good things instead of working on this system. And I'll tell you, this sounds totally terrible, but I've seen the first inklings of it in our black market here. You know, you think of a black market like a bazaar where there's an open air, people selling stuff. It's not like that at all. It's just people who know people and they're selling labor outside of the tax system. They're selling objects outside of the tax system and they're helping each other. When I was on the out and out and had nothing, a lot of what I did was trade labor for favors.
Yeah,
Not, you know, not something creepy, but
yeah.
you know, just somebody needs his computers fixed or needs me to mow his lawn or whatever, and
Hmm.
he's got some food or he knows a guy he can point me to who can help me out. That's
Hmm.
how you do it, and I'm seeing a lot of that here. There are a lot more people now working entirely off the books. They've stopped filing tax returns. They don't claim any of this income. They don't claim that they have businesses. You know, it's totally informal DBA. You pay me in cash or you pay me in a check. I've got a bank account somewhere. You know,
Hmm.
here we're lucky because we have so many illegals
Yeah,
that banking is now almost a paperless proposition, and that you know the evidence required to prove you are who you say you are is very 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 minimal
yeah.
and is easily faked. And so I'm seeing people just breaking away and they're going, you know what, I could earn $100,000 a year working for a corporate job, but I'll be very happy with $50,000 a year tax free, a nice little house somewhere. There's a lot more people buying land out of the way, moving trailers onto it, and living as off grid as you can. I mean, I think it's very ambitious to say you want to live 100% off grid,
Yeah.
but you know what? If you get some of your energy from electrical, if you live in a very efficient setting, if you've got a composting toilet, or at the very least you're using minimal water, you're mostly off the grid and
Mhm.
nobody really cares about you because you're not posting high numbers, you know, of
Yeah.
income. And that's
Yeah.
where I see it starting.
Yeah, well, sorry to interject. Yeah, it's just like several years ago. I mean, this has been the kind of trajectory of my life for shit, I don't know, 25, 30 years, something like that. Has been trying to do that with the realization that you can never be self-sufficient. But what you can do is you can put infrastructure into place that makes life run more smoothly when the rest of it doesn't run so smoothly. And you know, particularly where I live, we can get fairly harsh winters here, and we get pretty bad storms, so you get electric knocked out fairly regularly in the winter months and stuff. You can get some food issues and stuff because of the remoteness of the island, relative remoteness anyway. And it's good to be able to have all that stuff in place. Plus, it makes you feel like a man. You know what I mean? It's like but yeah, it's kind of like it's almost that is that we yearn for that as well. We yearn for that kind of like for a woman to feel like a woman and a guy to feel like a guy. It's like our places, the things that we do that we can protect, and we can provide shelter and some warmth, and all that kind of stuff. These sort of archetypal needs that we have, that we find some way of fulfilling in somehow in the present modern day, where it's not that urgent, but you still kind of like you're ready, not full on prepper stuff, but you like to think that there's enough skills. For instance, coming back to what you were saying, I really like this idea about the black market in labor. And I've often, in particularly when I was starting up as well, done work for, it's this is that, so it's like, I'll do you this, you can do me that, great. Sometimes you used to get cash and things like that, but that's kind of gone out now. But there was a let system here as well, which is a thing where it was almost like an invented currency that everybody had 20 of these, say, first of all, and then you started to do to start to trade and just swap stuff within people on the island communities. It didn't go off particularly well, but what I have been taking note of, there's a guy called Dave Silver, who's a Welshman, who's he's all over the whole silver thing without being one of these like, you got to buy silver now, bullion fucking nightmare kind of stuff. But talking about buying these like small like 1 gram little silver tabs and using those as a means of exchange in the future, because it kind of breaks down to, like you say, either if you as long as you've got a monetary system that's still operating, you can use the money that you get given by other people. Otherwise, you need to find a secondary and a tertiary, which is either direct goods or food or services, or a medium of exchange, which generally tends to be things that have a perceived value, which is out with that of the predilections of the financial elite. So you can say, yeah, bits of coin, bits of gold, bits of silver, and stuff like that can be a medium of exchange in a counter society, if you like. And again, the whole skill set thing. It's almost like you need a directory of who's around you and what can they do, and what do they want.
This we had a hurricane here about a decade or so ago, and it was so interesting to me that in the hours after the storm passed, there was a total division of the population. The useful people were doing useful things. Everyone else was doing, well, I don't know what they're doing, but who cares? There was a separation of the people who can do from the rest. The people who can do were out there cutting down trees. They were running up temporary lines, so forth and so on. Everyone else was just focused on themselves. And I think that there are natural leaders among us. This is separate from Jefferson's concept of natural aristocracy, which is really, truly a separate concept. But I think you've probably had this your whole life. You're a natural leader. When things go wrong, people are going to be looking to you to fix them. And that's because they recognize the competence, and they recognize that you think independently of the social group. Therefore, you're going to look at the problem as a logical question. In a Platonic sense, you're going to look at it and say, what do we have? How can we fix it? That kind of thing. And I think that there's a right-wing podcast in America that uses the phrase connection is protection. And I think that I'm seeing a lot of that, because I know people who are really competent at doing things. And when things go wrong, me and they and others who they know, we get together and we fix them as best we can. And this is what happens after a hurricane. My neighbor has a chainsaw. I've got some tool. I've got an axe. We go out there and we get the streets cleared, and people can get to wherever they need to get food, that kind of stuff. That some of your neighbors are quasi preppers, at least like me, where we've got a whole bunch of canned goods in the garage. Well, if the storm is really bad and the power is really down, I'm going to break out the camp stove and start feeding people. And I think that's the type of order we're looking at here, because we are. It's sort of similar to where people were in the last days of the Soviet Union. We're people for whom the system has gone away. It's effectively abandoned us. We may still have to deal with it on a day-to-day basis, but we're making plans for our survival and for our fulfillment, for our enjoyment of life, independent of it.
But over here, it's like the feeling now is that it's not leaving us alone. It's actively hostile to us, and that it has us as a particular group in its sights, and that they're going to need to get rid of us. We're in the way. We are in the way, and it just feels like that right now. And that's why it's really quite refreshing to see just normal people getting up and sticking a flag of a flagpole outside their house and saying, they've taken everything else now. You're trying to shut us up online and in every other mode that you possibly can, locking people away for 2 or 3 years for making stickers that say
Yeah.
it's okay to be white. Provocative is that really? It's like things are so ridiculous, but still there's no stopping them. There's no the reins are not being pulled on these people at all, and yeah, it's a shame that we're talking in this way because we are very much talking about surviving the immediate future and being able to rebuild. But it's like, really, is that what it's going to come to? Has everything got to go? What do you think will remain?
Oh, I think most things are going to remain. I think what's going to happen is a shift in what people want and in what they're willing to accept. A lot of people are going to leave government, are going to leave comfy jobs because they're going to be thrown out. But I think the average person, what you said is key to it. The average person is now on our side. They realize that the bureaucracy will replace us if it can, and even more, sees us as the last resistance to its total power. So it wants us dead. There's no doubt about it. This has been clear in my mind for a long time. And right now it's targeting whites. In the future, it's going to target people over 120 IQ points. I don't know where they'll go from there, but they will. Anyone who isn't going to fall into line. I mean, this is one of the great things about punk and anarchist punk and regular punk as well. I don't know how to make the distinction, but they pointed out that if you don't fall into line with the system, with the path, with what everyone else is doing, you're the head that stands up above the crowd that they want to cut off, whoever's in power. And so I think that now that's become more of a mainstream opinion. And so people are looking to retake institutions. It's starting here. There was the school board revolt where people started saying, "What are you teaching my children?" I think they're barking up the wrong tree. Why are you even trying to get government to educate your children at all? Do you trust it with that? I don't. But I think there's businesses are changing. I think there's going to be a sea change in perception, and as a result there's going to be a change in what people reward, and there's going to be political consequences based on that. The history we've grown up in, you and I both, has been the post-war history. So World War II ended, and everyone said, okay, well, we're not going to do that nasty fascism, racialism thing anymore. So we're going to do the democracy thing. That's the good thing. Everyone worked toward that, and everyone has been. They've all been pulling away. But I think that now they're going a different direction. And so I think what we're going to see from the world is it's going to be more like an EQ, like you use in music,
Mm,
then it's going to be like a radical change. I don't believe in the Hollywood type apocalypse, and I don't. If we're lucky, we're not going to deal with revolutions.
mm.
But I think what's going to happen is there's going to be things, little dials on the EQ turned up. And we're already seeing Gen Z do this. I want to spend more time with my friends and family. I
Yeah,
want to spend more time in nature. I'd
yeah.
like to spend less time doing things I hate. And so I think that that's going to change the market that actually influences the economy, and that in turn influences government. So I think we're going to see sort of a roundabout way toward change, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so yeah, that's what I like, that because like you're saying the same thing. It's the pursuit of excellence kind of thing and the recognition of that, as well as a return to the first primal reasons, and the ideas that are at the heart of our culture and that sustained it, but that we lost touch with somehow. It's like we have to find a way back to clear out all the brushwood and be able to see what's sitting there in the middle, what it was that we got disconnected from, and how we got disconnected. Because to to somebody living in Europe, looking over at the States, we would say that you have been a multicultural experiment over there, and to some extent, it's not that it's kind of, it is what it is, because there's so many people have been forced to go through this thing together. So it's taken for granted that that's what America is a group of different people, predominantly initially, obviously from European cultures, but over here we've had this stark imposition, which is being we're being ritually humiliated by just this inundation of hordes and hordes and hordes of people from completely incompatible cultures that are being put into the very hearts of our cities and towns and things like that, with the sheer nastiness of wanting to rub people's noses in it and say, you're going to have to get used to this. This is the way it's going to be in the future. So it's almost, what am I trying to say is that I think you've got to step up on us in many respects because you've already gone through the multiculti experiment and you've been able to gain some insights from that. And to be fair to your other ethnic communities there as well, they have too. So the people that are more honest with themselves will say, yeah, there is a problem demographically with crime and this and that, all the rest of it. And the people within those demographics are actually quite unhappy to still be stuck in there amongst all these assholes. So you wish the best for them too. So it's like America is big. It's a big country, and now it's starting to ironically appear as the last bastion of hope for people like myself. Although I can't see myself ever moving from a little island in Scotland. But if things got really shit, it's like give me a fucking farm in Montana, um, little bit of land and just leave me alone. I mean, you describe yourself as a nihilist. So, but there's kind of like there's touches of libertarianism. Would you say with yourself or no?
Oh, definitely. I think the libertarians are right about almost everything economic, and I think there's another important point they make, which is that within the context of a culture, I think we need to be very accepting of eccentricity, and just leave people alone. My
Mm,
whole life, whether it's been the right or the left, no one's been able to just leave people alone who are not causing problems. And this clashes with the social right, the social conservatives, because I say things like, I think we should just leave the homosexuals alone. I think we should just leave them alone, let them do their thing. They're going to be fine. It's just this isn't our business. We're going to be oppressive. We're doing wrong things.
mm,
Leave them alone. Nature will sort this out. And I don't mean by killing them. I mean they're just going to have their lives and they're going to be fine. Nature loves variation. Nature
yeah.
does not like sameness. Humans get very excited by sameness. I think it's a very diseased mentality that comes off the assembly line mentality. You have a big metal stamper and you make all these identical little objects. Well, nature doesn't do that. It always creates variation, creates texture, creates depth, and that kind of thing. And I think that as we're looking toward a future time, we're trying to find a fusion of what we know of the past and what we know the future has to be, which should, in my view, should include things like space travel and that kind of thing. And so,
Okay.
in the middle, there's sort of a libertarian position of mine, which is quasi-libertarian, but is basically like, yeah, reward good behavior, reward intelligent, productive, contributive, creative, whatever it is, and get rid of people who are doing really horrible things and leave everyone else alone. Let us become who we are, because I feel like I didn't mature, at least until my late 30s. I feel like people need to be really, really left alone until they can figure this stuff out, at least. And in a libertarian context, I don't believe in government as the agent of change that's going to help us. I think
Mm,
that markets work better, especially under culture. When you have a little town and everyone is, has a specialty, they have a business. One guy does carpentry, one guy does plumbing, et cetera, et cetera. I think things just work out. And when you
mm.
stick taxes in there and paperwork and rules and regulations, I think things get more complicated. So America is sort of what was it they said about Los Angeles? It's the world if you held down the fast forward button. America's a little bit like that. We had a big shift in our diversity in the 90s through the Obama years, because previously we were a very highly segregated, diverse society, meaning you had white neighborhoods, you had black neighborhoods, you had Hispanic neighborhoods. And starting in the 90s with different incentives, but really accelerating under Obama, they started moving everybody all around. And that's when I think our crisis really reached a peak, because people were starting to say, like, the way we used to do things in this neighborhood is gone. And
Yeah.
our ability to go hang out in front of our houses is gone. Our block parties are gone. We don't really know our neighbors. We don't know what our neighbors expect from us. We don't know what they'll reward. We're basically isolated in our houses. And this was when I remember this time was when the first big screen TVs were suddenly everywhere, because everyone was staying home and watching movies instead of going out to the world. And then the internet took off because nobody wanted to go out into the world. And I think that's the price of diversity, is alienation. And for me, one of the most educational things I ever saw was I was in Los Angeles and I witnessed a mini race war between blacks and Hispanics. And I realized, oh my God, this isn't working for them either. And everybody is going to die if we don't do something about this.
Yeah.
Very, very educational moment.
I think that people have tried to play down the significance of the whole in-group preference thing. It's like it's completely built in. It's in our software, as human beings, and there's nothing wrong with that. It seems that the natural state of affairs is that we should have that, and we should be able to say, I can identify a group with whom I feel comfortable because we do share all these kind of nebulous ideas, maybe, but also sort of cultural marker posts as well that we relate to, and ways of relating to one another as well. So socially and all the rest of it, how to look after each other and how to take care of one another's interests and stuff. And these are all good things. But when you look around the world as well, I mean, I don't know whether you remember the Dalai Lama used to be in great favor with the people on the whatever we call the left these days, because you think it's some sort of wishy-washy Buddhism and all the rest. Until he made the remark about the migration into Europe, he said yes. He said these people can come and then they must go home again afterwards. And people don't like that. It's like you're quite right. Come if you need to come to a place, and there are people that are stupid or open enough to be able to open up their homes and their and their wallets to you. Okay, sure, be respectful, and do the healing that you need, and then fuck off back where you came from, because we don't get polar bears in the Sahara, do we? It's like we all have places where we thrive best, and people who amongst whom we thrive too, which doesn't make us antagonistic to other folk. It's just you recognize the world is full of all this true diversity, which is not enforced. It's the fact that everything has permutations.
Yeah. It's true. I think that for me, the greatest advantage of a monoethnic society is that everyone roughly knows what's expected of them. They
Mm.
know what's going to be rewarded and they know what's going to be punished. So at that point, life is a pretty simple task and there's not much internal communication needed. We're not constantly having a discussion about something. You're like, hey, this guy here, he's like me. We've got the same motivations. We do things the same way. We don't need to discuss it. We don't need to debate it to death. We're just going to do this and save a whole bunch of time and get on to the important parts of life, which are not really social. It's inside. It's how we develop as people.
So do you think we work better in small clan type units, or on a broader scale?
I think we work best in networks of small villages or towns or even very small cities.
Mm.
I think we work best in monoethnic societies, not just monoracial, but monoethnic, where everyone shares some kind of culture, some understanding of faith, of religion, or not. I mean, but
Yeah.
has sort of those things in common. And I think that it's best if we know the people around us, grow up with them, and if things don't change much. We need
Mm.
homes. We need towns that we can go back to where things are roughly the same. Not saying don't have change, but just keep change very gradual because people need those landmarks, as you would say, guideposts. And they need to know what is expected of them and what will be rewarded. I think our biggest quest in life is to be significant as individuals. And you say,
Mm.
how do I become significant? Well, that's a cultural thing. So, in Texas, I become significant by taking care of my family, by having good cattle, by shooting bad guys, that kind of thing. We got to play into the stereotypes here. We will not talk about the sheep, but you know, I mean, I know what I have to do to succeed within my people, and I'm in the Anglo-Saxon part of Texas, and here
Okay.
when we grew up, there was a strong code of honor, there was a strong code of ethics, and we knew
Mm.
what we were supposed to do, and we knew what wasn't acceptable. You didn't leave a drunk girl with some guy you didn't trust. There were just all these things, and I think that's what people crave and can't get in the current system.
Are we noticing this seismic shift in the upcoming younger generations now? They seem to have noted it in the UK, and perhaps that's the same in the States as well, where they're getting a lot more small c conservative, a lot more new right, if you like, in their outlook, a lot less tolerant toward the ideas that previous generations have just shut up and accepted. It would be really nice if we're finding a new strong generation. That would be great because hopefully the old fucks like myself, you'd have something to be able to share and say, just a little bit of advice or whatever, if we could find a way to translate that. But it would be great to think there was an entire generation coming up that we could help to form this a new way for themselves, to form a way to return, a
Yeah,
remembrance,
I think it's happening. And I think they're learning from what you've done, from what the previous generations have done, both good and bad. They're
Mm,
looking at the baby boomers saying, I don't want to end up like that. These are the guys who are prowling around Spotify at 4 a.m. finding old Amoebix tracks or old DRI tracks. They're
yeah,
very interested in this stuff. They're very interested in the 80s because they sensed there was a divergence then. And I think what they're looking at is something between Return to the Land, Trad Wife, all of that stuff, and how do we form something great? Not
yeah,
to steal a word from Reagan and Trump, but I think they want us not to just retreat. I think they want us to retake our countries and point them away from this corporate hell
yeah,
towards something that actually achieves something worth a damn for anyone. And it is, I think, a very benevolent movement, but it's also very strong in that I think as we were talking about earlier, the distinction between far right and normal has sort of blurred in a big
mm,
way for this new generation.
yeah. Well, that's really good to hear because I often get stuck in that morbid kind of loop about, oh shit, it's all going to hell and all the rest of it. Like we get that old black pill thing going on, but it would be great to think of a whole reinvention. And you forget, don't you? As you get older, you think when you're young, you've got all that energy that you just need to burn, and you can throw yourself into stuff really fully. So with people like that, it's unstoppable. And I think I take that as really encouraging to think that they will find a way. And if we can help in any way, that would be fantastic. Just tell us what we need to do because we want to be bloody useful. It's like I don't want to go through my life just thinking, well, take, 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 take. I've got to have a reason for being because this life is so important. And you must be able to give something back. And if it's not the traditional way of, as I say, going down and doing the community meeting or something kind of like obnoxious like that, in some form, we've got to be able to find a way to communicate or just to do. It could be as simple as building or, like you say, exchanging labor for food or a place to stay and stuff. These are really good things. I mean, I'm glad that you feel optimistic, would you say?
I do. Things were really, really bad for many, many years, and I think they're looking up. I think it takes, I never knew how long it took things to happen. I mean, the 80s was only 40 years ago. That's the blink of an eye for
Mm,
history, for geology. That's nothing. And I was expecting like, yeah, in 10 years we'll be doing something different. Well, that's really ambitious. It takes a long time. But I do think, hitting on a couple points you made. First, I think the future is going to be informal. I think there's going to be less going down to committee meetings and more people who can do things talking with each other.
mm,
And second, I think that people are going to look instead of for negative meaning, like, oh, I didn't offend anyone, they're going to be looking for positive meaning. People are seeking something to make themselves feel that they are spending their time well. And they have not had this for decades. And it's
mm.
starting to really it's killing people off. I mean, people are dying of preventable fates all the time. And I'm sure there's some in the UK too, hopefully not as many as here, but it's very destructive. And I think nobody feels like their lives really mean anything. And
Yeah.
so there's a backlash against that happening too.
The lack of meaning, yeah, absolutely. And it's that I guess a lot of kids are returning to religion and spirituality and stuff like that, which I think there's something good to that in that there's a kind of a way of finding something within yourself, being able to find your own inner resources, however that tends to manifest. And it goes on to allow one to make more of a broader inquiry as you get older, but yeah, to kind of round things off as well, it's like you and I, we've had a few exchanges of emails over the years and things like that, and you were deeply involved with the metal scene. I mean, I'm trying to see through your eyes. Is that still something which is very deep and meaningful to you in your life? I mean, are you invested in music as much as you were?
Yes, I listen to a lot of classical now. I'm really fond of the composer Bruckner, but I do still listen. I listen to a lot of metal and some of the old punk as well.
Okay.
I think it had a spirit that I always want to borrow from, that I'm always enchanted by, and it stirs my imagination. So yes, very much. And I still write about a lot of metal
Yeah.
when there's something good to write about. You know, I every now and then you get a band like Desecrezi or Dissidents from Colombia that comes up, and you're like, okay, these guys are doing something. And to me, it's really fascinating still how there's, nature works in terms of spirit almost, and you can sense a spirit from a band that it's got some idea, it's self-possessed, it's got some goal, it's got some way of viewing the world that's unique to it, even if it's not really materially musically all that different from anything else. There's just a way you can tell from how things are organized, and that will never fail to fascinate me.
Authenticity. Um, as well, isn't it? There's like sometimes you can hear something and you go, yeah, there's a depth to that which you wouldn't immediately notice, but that transmits itself as well. So there's some stuff like there's some music that I still will go back to, although these days I've become really stuck in my ways. I'm not really interested musically anymore, and like yourself, I'm tending to listen to, if anything, it's classical stuff or it's sort of Gregorian stuff or early church music and things like that because it kind of gives me its own sort of buzz too. But yeah, authenticity. When you see that, I think that's very important to uphold that too. So, are you still working with Death Metal Underground?
Yes, I am still
Is that
writing
is
for
that
them
your
and still.
initiative? That one?
Yeah, that came out of the anus.com site. We sort of decided to split it off so it could be mostly apolitical and mostly aphilosophical.
Mhm.
And I had the domain name, so I figured, why not? Let's champion death metal. But yeah,
Mhm.
I write as much as I can for them. Sometimes more than other times, just depending on how much time I have.
Yeah. And what's your day to day? Are you working?
Yes, I work in IT, but I have organized my life so that I can steal as much time as possible for what I call living.
Yeah. And do you still get out into the forests?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's harder these days because the city has grown so much and they've taken out a lot of my forests. But my favorite thing to do when I'm on my own is to just wander among the woods. Or sometimes it's not what probably would qualify as forest for you, but it's the scrub type stuff we have here.
Mm.
Sometimes it's just wandering the fields, but I like to go out, hang out with the coyotes and the
Mm.
fish and the birds and stuff like that. The snakes. We have wonderful snakes here.
Yeah, that you do. Yeah, that's. I mean, there's in hard times as well, and you've obviously been through some tough times in your own life. You find that the one true thing that you can always count on is nature itself, and you can disappear from away from people, and you can just look, and that's more than enough, more for a million lifetimes. Just the wonder of everything, of the fact that we're in these bodies and we're on this world, and there's, it's just so intricately and marvelously formed that that's what should be the focus of our attention, not some fucking Netflix movie series or something like that. We should be looking. We should be looking and looking and looking and looking in wonder at this life itself, and and embracing all of that stuff. Yeah, I'm glad to hear it, and it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, and inspirational as well because you can get this sort of malaise. It's quite easy to get into, particularly, when you're feeling that you're surrounded by hostile forces in so many different ways. But if there's even the smallest spark of enthusiasm, it fans up amongst other people. And enthusiasm, enthusiasmos, to be full of God from the original. It's like, yeah. So thank you for that, and thank you for your wise words. I'm hoping that people can hear and they can expand on that, and that we can all find a way forward in these difficult times.
I hope so. It's a great honor and pleasure to speak with you. I've admired your work from afar for years, and I'll tell you, I am very positive because I think that in this universe, the basic construction you talk about, the wonder of everything, the fact that we're even here, the fact that there's hummingbirds and hawks as well as pigeons,
Yeah.
all of this points to a very magical place we live in, and I think intelligence is going to win out in the end. I've staked
Mm.
my life on it, so it's all I can do, really.
Yeah, fantastic, Brett. Thanks so much, my friend. Um, I will speak to you after the show. And for now, thank you. See you again.
Thank you and good night.
Cheers, man.